What I loved about being the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Galt was designing facilities for the community. When I learned that I was going to be losing my job, I was devastated to be treated like the way I was treated with 25 years of dedicated service for the City of Galt. It had a major impact on myself and my family. When I read the article in the Galt Herald back in March 2011, I was devastated by the comments that Mr. Berman, the city manager, had made that he was targeting older employees rather than the younger employees. It's typically the philosophy that the last hired are the first fired, but not in this case. I felt myself and the planning director were targets for Mr. Berman and the City Council of Galt.
Do you feel picked on because you're older than your coworkers? Do you suspect you lost your job because you're older and because you made more money than younger workers? Age discrimination is a common complaint. A recent survey for AARP reported 64% of respondents thought that people older than 50 face age discrimination in the workplace. Some 34% said they had either personally faced age discrimination in the last 4 years or they know someone who has. The impact of age discrimination is more than just financial. Older workers who think they are discriminated against are always so angry and hurt. Their personal identity is tied up in their jobs. But feeling like a victim of age discrimination and being able to prove it are two very different things. Proving age discrimination has never been easy, but in 2009, a U.S. Supreme Court ruling made it even more difficult. In the 2009 Gross versus FBL Financial Services case, the court changed the rules. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, a former Monsanto corporate lawyer, wrote in the majority decision that the employer doesn't have to show it would have taken action, regardless of age, even when an employee has evidence that age was a motivating factor in that decision. New legislation that would change burden of proof and causation standards for a number of employment discrimination claims was reintroduced in the House and Senate in July 2013. The Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act would overturn two Supreme Court decisions that toughened the burdens of proof for employees bringing discrimination claims under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act or advancing retaliation claims under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. In reversing Gross, the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act would establish that when an employee shows discrimination was a motivating factor behind a decision, the burden shifts back to the employer to show it complied with the law. In essence, a plaintiff bringing a claim under the ADEA would not be required to demonstrate that age was the sole cause of the contested employment practice. In a more recent Supreme Court decision, University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center versus Nassar, the court held that Title VII retaliation claims must be proved using a but-for causation standard as well. Under the standard of causation adopted in Nassar, a claimant must prove that the unlawful retaliation would not have occurred in the absence of the alleged wrongful action or actions of the employer. The Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act would provide that the more lenient motivating factor standard would apply not just to ADEA claims, but also to retaliation claims involving race, sex, national origin, and religion, as well as claims brought under the Americans with Disability Act and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. In a press release, Senator Patrick Leahy, one of the Senate bill's co-sponsors, said, "The Supreme Court's divisive holding in Gross has created uncertainty in our civil rights laws, making it incumbent on Congress to clarify our intent and the statutory protections that all hardworking Americans deserve. Our bipartisan bill reestablishes Congress's intent that age discrimination is unlawful and it makes clear that employers cannot get away with age discrimination by simply coming up with a reason to terminate an employee that sounds less controversial. The older generation, those born from 1946 to 1964, account for the fastest growing segment of workplace discrimination claims. In 2012, 22,875 people filed age claims with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, compared with 15,875 in 1997. Employers may think they can get rid of older workers and bring in younger, less experienced workers to save money without realizing that could constitute age discrimination. Today, the Insider exclusive investigative news team goes behind the headlines in You're Old and You're Fired, Boyce Jeffries' story, to examine how Lawrence Bohm, founder at the Bohm Law Group, and Bianca Saad, one of the Bohm Law Group's associate trial attorneys, are pursuing justice for their client Boyce Jeffries against the city of Galt, California, in an age discrimination case to get justice for Boyce and to send a message to the public that older, more experienced employees and members of society should be valued and respected and not simply discarded like yesterday's trash. Lawrence Bohm and Bianca Saad have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best trial lawyers in Sacramento, in California, and across the United States. Lawrence recently won a landmark $168 million verdict for his client Ani Shaporian in a sexual harassment and retaliation case. His firm's goals are not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure that everyone is treated with equal respect and dignity as guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. Lawrence has built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. His amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Sacramento, California. It's my great pleasure to introduce Lawrence Bohm and Bianca Saad to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm, Lawrence.
We are a Sacramento-based firm that represents the people of the state of California in their cases and claims against companies and entities that have treated them badly or injured them through negligence. We also do a lot of hospital litigation work in terms of representing doctors and nurses who report misconduct and patient safety violations.
Always representing the little guy, right?
We are 100% by the people and for the people.
Today we have such a case. It is the case of Boyce Jeffries. It's an age discrimination and a wrongful termination case. Tell our audience a little bit about Boyce. What kind of guy is he?
Boyce Jeffries is the father that every kid wished they had. He's the coach that every sports player wishes they had. He's the employee that every employer wishes they had. Somebody who cares more about the customers and the clients than the notions of profit and policy. He is a people person, and he is the perfect plaintiff for what I hope will be a case that tests whether justice is really suffering in this country or not.
Bianca, what was his job?
Boyce was the director of Parks and Recreation, and he was in that position for, 27 years. And in fact, when he first started working for the city of Galt, there was no Parks and Recreation department. He essentially built that department from the ground up and started off working part-time. There were no leagues, softball, soccer. Boyce created all of that, brought fabulous parks to the city of Galt. And in fact, for the city, the Parks and Recreation Department is now one of their crowned jewels that they boast, that sports and rec, Parks and Rec, that's what we do. This is what people do here in the community, and they love it. So Boyce was really just the touchstone of what the city of Galt is so proud of.
So here we have a pillar in the community. He's dedicated his life, 27 years, to building up parks and recreation, City of Galt, right? And what happens to him?
Well, under the guise of financial tough times, the city manager, Jason Berman, made it publicly known that there were going to be layoffs. What he didn't make publicly known is how he was going to go about selecting the layoffs. And what ended up happening was an interesting backroom meeting between the city manager and the reporters at the Galt Herald, where they were there actually complaining that the newspaper was asking unprofessional questions about this strange decision to lay off 3 people all over 50. And in that private meeting, Mr. Berman explained, he let the cat out of the bag. And in just a moment of rare genuineness and probably obtuseness, not knowing how incorrect what he was going to say was, he admitted to the press that in making the selection of who to be in the layoff, that he was targeting older workers in an effort to safeguard the jobs of younger workers who have young families.
But he also said that these older workers were being paid more money than anybody else.
Oh, that was a reason to target them.
Yeah, and he brought up the fact that the city was in dire financial straits, which didn't exactly pan out.
Well, maybe $250 million could be perceived by some as dire financial straits, but when your balance sheet shows that you're in the black to the tune of $250 million, that's a tough one to sell in court. I'm glad I don't have to sell that.
Now, interestingly enough, the reporter, the newspaper, is it the Galt Herald?
Yes.
They actually reported on this meeting. They published those very same reasons, correct?
They pulled the story from print to add in that letting the cat out of the bag statement.
And never has the city required a retractment, have they?
There has been no request for a retraction. And worse still, the city manager the next day called the reporter
and congratulated
them. And complimented her, saying only positive things about the story.
What can be going through the city manager's mind when in the newspapers it actually verifies and corroborates that he's getting rid of these people because they're too old and they cost too much money?
Well, to quote the reporter, this didn't seem to matter until the lawsuit started to come around the corner. Then all of a sudden, after Mr. Berman got a letter from my office indicating that an age discrimination lawsuit was about to come, he sent himself an email only to himself, explaining what he thought he meant when he was talking to the Galt Herald. But interestingly, didn't copy it on anybody in City Council. And even in that email, he basically says, no, I was picking them because they had options other than being laid off, also known as retirement.
Yeah.
So he wasn't targeting older workers, he says. I just picked these people because they were eligible for retirement, which of course is because of their age.
In these kinds of cases, Lawrence, what are some of the hurdles and the challenges that you have to overcome when you prove the case?
Well, we're a little guy going up against the city. And one of the hurdles is going to be what we've seen is a very hard-fought battle. The city has unlimited resources, which they've certainly utilized. They've built a haystack. When we went to go and examine the financial records, they literally had stacks and piles of books and financial records telling us basically if we want answers, we have to find it ourselves. And that's been a real challenge. And then telling the truth. That's another challenge, is, you know, people who think that they can come into court and lie to a jury are crazy. That's going to be a big challenge because, you know, they're already on video saying what they've said in this case.
Right.
In fact, the city manager's already in print several times saying what they said. And a current city council member confirms that the very statement made in the paper is what he was told when he was included in that layoff with Mr.
Basically
Jeffries.
admitting it, admitting age discrimination, you know, as if they didn't know the law, right? Now they're trying to retract it. We fortunately have Boyce with us today, so let's bring him on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Boyce Jeffries to the show. Welcome to the show, Boyce.
Thank you, sir.
Tell our audience a little bit about your job before. You were Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Galt, correct?
Correct. I started back in December of 1984. They did not have a department, so it was basically at that time me, myself, and I. And worked there for over 25 years, built numerous parks and facilities, won an award for the Aquatic Center from CPRS, the California Parks and Recreation Society. And it was very rewarding in developing the parks for the citizens of the community.
Yeah. When you started, there was just you.
Correct.
When you left, how many people were working underneath you?
During peak seasons, as many as 150,
Wow.
including part-timers.
And were you involved, like you talked about developing parks and getting recreational facilities, were you involved with the budgets at the city and saying, we need this, and promoting it and telling what you're designing the park?
Yes.
No, you worked there 25 years?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden one day they said, you got to go.
Yes.
What did you feel?
I was devastated, very disappointed.
And what reason did they give you?
They said it was due to the budget.
Yeah. What did you find out?
After doing some research, there was other ways they could have addressed the budget shortage. There's other funds that they could pay for my position.
Yeah.
And again, I was just very disappointed being treated like the way I was for my dedication of over 25 years to the city of Galt.
Yeah, basically shown the door. Now they've offered him another position. Is that correct, Lawrence?
Well, there's been a sort of an offer.
Yeah.
He was
but at
supposed
far
to-
less money.
Far less money. He was making $127,000 a year approximately, with additional money for benefits.
Yeah.
Now it's a $40-something thousand job, but he should have started it 2 weeks ago. And now they're saying because the trial starts next Monday that they're not going to allow him to come back to work, but the city that's having hard financial trouble is going to, they say, pay him to be at the trial on an administrative leave. So he would start this new job on suspension.
How has this impacted your personal life?
It was devastating. Initially, I had to move from my 5-acre farm into the community. I have 2 adult children that were attending Sac State. So for financial reasons, I had to move to Elk Grove just to try to maintain my maintenance and operation of the family.
Yeah, you had to sell your property, didn't you?
Correct.
Okay, and I'm sure, how long had you lived at that property?
Over 8 years.
8
and I
years.
lost about $100,000.
You're on national TV now. What do you have to say to other folks out there who may be experiencing a similar situation like yours?
I would highly recommend that you take into consideration, look at the big picture, and is it really that bad as people say it is? Do your research in that as much as you can in that capacity.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on our show, and we wish you much success.
Thank you very much.
What is age discrimination anyway?
Well, age discrimination is when essentially an employer treats an employee differently because of their age. So for example, if somebody has to be selected for a layoff and the employer decides, well, this person's old and they may have health issues, or they're not going to last too much longer anyway, so let's just get rid of the old people. I mean, that's just your most obvious classic case of age discrimination.
Lawrence, how do you prove age discrimination?
You got to have comments. I mean, there are some attorneys who have been successful bringing what they call a statistical case, where you look at the entire workforce and you say, well, statistically, people over 40, which is the line of demarcation, unfortunately for me, I'm now a protected employee. But once you go over 40,
Is 40?
40 is the line of demarcation, 40 and over. So if you're running around and you're doing things to people who are 40 or over, and it's bad, then you're likely looking at age discrimination. How do you prove it? Is, well, like in this case, a statement admitting that age was a factor, that you targeted older workers. Sometimes it's comments like, come on, old man, or comments about how it's time to retire or put you out to pasture. It's the most difficult case to prove and win, because most of the time the decision makers are also over 40.
How do you select a client? What's your criteria?
Well, first we talk to them, get an idea of what happened to them, their story. Assuming that the facts of the case are something that are appealing to us, and looking at the law, that this is a case we could pursue. We do look at other things. How does the client present? Are they honest? It's almost like a job interview.
Right.
I mean, we're looking at this person, seeing how how do they present their story, and how we have to work with this person closely. And so if there are any kind of red flags that come up, then we may not pursue it. But that's just some of the basic things. I'm sure Lawrence could add to that.
Yeah, what are some of the red flags that come up in your mind when you're interviewing someone for a potential representation of their case?
Anybody who comes to me and tells me that they think they have a multi-million-dollar case is immediately somebody I don't want to represent.
So it isn't about the money.
It's definitely not about the money.
Yeah.
It's about the principle.
Yeah.
And so when my favorite clients, the ones who say, I hate being here, and I would have loved to never come here, and I would have taken almost nothing. I mean, we did a tremendous job on a wrongful death case where the family initially only came to see us because they received a bill for $10,000 for time that their loved one was dead. And so here they are in my office asking me to help them out just to fight the hospital bill, when what it turned out is the hospital was negligent and caused the death of their loved one. And that's what gets me. Is I love clients who come in because they believe in America and they believe in that. They want justice. Yeah.
Well, you're both getting justice for your clients. I want to thank you both very much for being on our program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.